My guest today is Pippa. 20 years ago, something terrible happened. Pippa got lost in the ocean.
The scariest times for me was knowing that behind me was nothing but ocean.
She thought she would die.
I said goodbyes to my family in my head.
Thank God she got saved, but the trauma remained.
It's funny, 20 years on, I can picture it as if it was yesterday. I still feel it.
Today, for the first time, she publicly shares what exactly happened on this tragic day, how she was able to overcome trauma of water, and even though she's still afraid to go in the water, she did more than 2,500 dives and guided more than 10,000 people. Please enjoy this very deep and very raw, very personal conversation with Pippa. Hey guys, Anatoly here. Before we continue, a quick ask. I know you're enjoying the show. I would like to bring bigger guests, and the best way you can help me is please subscribe, because it helps me to get more reach and give us all more opportunity to learn from the best in the world. I really appreciate you. Now let's go back to the show. You got lost in the sea. If we go back to that day, I guess,
Okay.
when the things happened.
It was 20 years ago to this year, and I was a very young marine biologist in the early stages of my career, still at university actually. I was here in Indonesia, and I was on what is called a liveaboard boat. So it's a boat that takes you diving. And I was a very early diver, sort of early in my career of diving as well. I was an open water diver, so I only had, I think, 12 dives at that time. And what happened was we were on this boat, and we took the dive masters, the people in control of the boat. They went and dived this particular dive site, and then we as a group did it the following morning, early morning. And there are many things that happen when you dive. You have to do a lot of checks about your area, your location, the current, so that you know what conditions you're up against. Some of those were done, some of them were not. And then we went diving, and we were in the middle of what we didn't know at the time was a very large current. So when we went underwater, normally you orientate yourself to the reef, but there was no reef there to orientate to. So we continued diving and trying to find the reef, and we couldn't. So I was the first one to say, I don't want to do this anymore. I was getting it was hard to breathe. I was getting slightly panicked. I didn't know what panic underwater felt like at that time, but I know now that's what panic underwater was. And so the dive master who was leading the dive just spoke to the three of us and said, are you, underwater, made notes on we have an underwater slate to communicate underwater. She made notes on there and said, do you want to go up? And we always said, yes, we do. So we went up slowly, and we were only down for 9 minutes. But in that time, we had moved a long way from the main boat. And when you're on a large boat, a smaller boat called a tender takes you to the dive site, and they should then stay above you. But ours did not. It went back to the boat for some supplies and then didn't come back to us. They know that we're normally down for a duration of approximately an hour. So I imagine what happened was that they thought they would just come back out again later, and then they didn't, because they didn't expect us to come up so early. So we were then drifting on the water, top of the water, away from the main boat. But it was very early in the morning and nobody knew where we were. There was nobody else out on the water. And it didn't take us long to move around a corner of the headland, which meant that we were then out of the direct line of the boat and away from where we would normally have been diving. So in those situations, it's a case of, okay, what are the next steps to do? You wear a weight belt, so we have got rid of our weight belt. You just drop it in those situations so that you're not so heavy, or as light as possible, buoyant as possible on the surface. You have what's called an SMB, a surface marker buoy. So we inflated those and had those. We were holding those. But when we were holding those and let go of our weight belts, we were then 4 people, but separate in the water. And as we went around this headland, we all just moved apart from each other. So essentially then you're solo. And as we moved around this headland, there were very big waves. So we're in our scuba kit. We have a surface marker buoy, but there's nothing else around. There's no boats, there's no nothing. And so the current was taking us away from the land. So originally we'd been traveling in line with the land, parallel to the land, and now you're moving away from the land. And I think that was probably one of the scariest times for me, was knowing that behind me was nothing but ocean. And I was moving away from the one thing that I thought could keep me safe. And there were no boats in view. And the 3 other people that I was with were all dotted about all over the place. So in those situations, you go into automatic pilot of, how do I stay safe? Sometimes we panic in situations, anything that appears in life. And sometimes we have to find a conscious or subconscious solution to the problem. And generally these things, I feel, happen in these really rare situations where we are potentially talking about life or death. Sometimes you have a choice, sometimes you don't, I think, depending on the situation. So it was a case of, how do I stay alive? And how do I not panic and drown with panic, because I have nothing else that I can do here. So I chose in that moment to turn myself, so I was facing the ocean. So I couldn't see how quickly I was moving from the land. That was one of the most difficult parts for me, was how quickly I was moving from the land, and I had no control over myself getting back to land and to what I felt was safety. So I turned myself away and I sang. I sang to myself and I hummed and I just made sound. It got to the point where I said goodbyes to my family in my head, because I just didn't know what was going to happen. I had no idea what the outcome of this situation was going to be. I wasn't sure if there were sharks in that area. I had a fear of being eaten by a shark at that time. I didn't know where land was, if there was going to be any land. I didn't know if a boat would come along, but in that moment, all you can see is ocean. So that continued for over 4 hours.
Wow.
And then you just, for that period of time, I don't really recall it being that long. You sort of become not trance-like, but you just are in survival mode. You have to stay alive. And so I just sang, and we had these huge waves. So I kept my mask on my face, and I kept my regulator in my mouth. And because we weren't down for very long, there was a lot of air in the tank. And because we were on the surface, you don't use it very quickly. You use air a lot more quickly at pressure, so the deeper that you are. So on the surface, it was keeping me, I could breathe. I could also breathe without it if I didn't want to. And you can inflate your BCD if you have to. So I was having a fully inflated BCD, so I just bobbed on the ocean like a cork for hours. Wow. And then, little did we know, but there was another group that were also diving at the time. They'd also been caught in these currents, but had gone in a different direction. They'd then been able to kick their way back to the boat, and they were also very late back to the boat, 40 minutes late. And because the tender driver had also not been there to pick them up either. But of course for them, they were on the surface and they were just so angry apparently, because they thought, why is the other group? Why have they not alerted that we're late back to the boat? The boat should have been coming to get us. Why are they not here? Little did they know that we were still at sea. And so they got back to the boat 40 minutes after they should have done. And the first thing was knowing that we weren't there. So the first thing was, where's the other group? And the boat crew just looked at them as if to say, we don't know. So they just thankfully See, it's funny. 20 years on, it's still, I can picture it as if it was yesterday. I still feel it. I feel it in my body. I feel all those emotions of everything that both that we went through, that I went through, but also that the other team must have gone through, knowing, because I then ran liverboards after that. We'll come back to that. So they just went into full emergency protocol of search patterns. You put the boat into a search pattern that's going to be the most likely shape to try and find people who are lost at sea. And they did a search pattern knowing which way the currents were going. And they eventually saw one of our SMBs and slowly came towards us. But it was really big seas, too big for us, but also very big for this boat. She was a big boat, but big wooden boats in Indonesia, it's difficult for them to turn in big waves. So anyway, they came towards me first. And of course, I started hearing in my whatever state I was in, I started hearing people shouting. So once I realized it was people shouting, I started looking around and realized that the boat was coming towards us. And then that's when you panic. When you know, well, in my situation, in this situation, when I knew that I was potentially going to be rescued, I then had complete fear that I wouldn't be rescued.
Oh, well.
Because you suddenly go into, what if they don't see me? Or what if they don't find me? Or what if I can't get on the boat? So I'm kicking frantically and the boat comes towards me and someone reaches down for me and I reach up. But the boat is coming at still quite a speed because it's hard to slow down and keep the boat running and not knock me over because I'm bobbing in the ocean. And as they reach down for me, we hold hands and then the boat's going too fast and they let go and I go underwater and I don't remember anything then after that until I wake up from being unconscious on the boat. So I don't know how they lifted me out. Apparently they jumped in, pulled me out. I'm face down in the water. And then I wake up in the boat with oxygen on my face. Everyone has been rescued. Everyone is alive. Some people have jellyfish stings. Some people are just in full panic, trauma. All I can remember is I just remember waking up on oxygen and then we had to go into a space where we had to turn the boat around. And the captain said, you have to hold on because I don't know if we can turn this boat around. So we had a lifeboat, an inflatable, which is like in a tube. And it's one of those that if it hits the water, it then opens. So that was on the boat. So we knew that if she couldn't turn around, that we had a lifeboat, a life raft. And then we just all hold on and the boat turns. And these boats in some ways are amazing because they can go to quite an angle. And she was just hanging on her side and we were hanging onto the side as he just had full power on the engine to turn us to go back to where we needed to go. Because if we'd carried on this way, there was no land that we could get to. So we didn't know then if the boat would be able to get back to land. So we turned and she made it. And then we returned to the island to where we had come from to get on to board the liveaboard.
It's a crazy story.
It's a crazy story. Oh my God. My heart is racing just talking about it.
Wow. So I want to talk about what was not done right.
Yeah.
And then we can go about how you were able to do 2,500 dives afterwards, which is crazy. So experiencing that. So was it a recreational dive or was it like marine biology related dive?
It was both, I suppose. There were recreational dives. It was in an experience that I was having as a trainee marine biologist. Yeah. But those particular dives were really recreational.
And then when you said that you descended and there was a huge current, so somebody else before you, the dive master, I guess, descended first, did they realize there was a current, or
So the
how
thing
did that
is,
happen?
yeah, the thing that happens a lot in this country, the majority of my dives have been in Indonesia, and the waters here are incredibly diverse, but they are renowned across the archipelago, which is very long. There are some areas of Indonesia which are renowned for strong currents, just based on the bathymetry topography of the ocean floor and the way that the currents move around the islands. So in that particular area, we had some really strong currents. So currents can change very, very quickly. I've been on a boat where I've done a current test myself as a dive master, and I've thought, there's no way we can dive here. I get back on the boat and the boat crew will say, it's okay, just wait a few minutes, and they'll drop. And you think, no. And literally a few minutes later, and they completely change. So in an ideal world, what a dive master would do is they would do a current test before we go in the water to see which way the currents are moving, how strong it is, whether it is feasible to dive. We also then have a strategy or procedure for what happens if we abort a dive, both from underwater and on the surface, what we should deploy, and that tender driver, either a dive boat is a smaller dive boat and is moored to a buoy, or if you're doing a current dive, which means you generally go in one direction, a tender or the dive boat will generally follow you. They'll follow your bubbles. When you're, as a scuba diver, your bubbles come from your regulator. If you're diving on normal scuba apparatus, the bubbles come to the surface and you can see them pop on the surface. So you can see divers, a lot of dive masters or dive companies follow their divers just from the surface because it's easy to see depending on how many groups you have.
Yep.
So the things that should have happened is really the location in which we descended. We should have orientated to the reef so that we descended directly next to the reef. Right next to the reef, the currents are slightly less strong to being slightly further away from the reef. So orientation to the reef always. Probably in that current, that strength that we experienced, we wouldn't have dived. We'd have gone to a different location. But the key thing was that the tender driver, the boat, didn't follow the divers. In any situation, if a diver needs to come to the surface urgently, they need to be as close to that boat as possible. I now am an exceptionally conservative diver, which again we can talk about in more detail. But for me, I will always dive with a boat that will always be watching where I'm going and stay with the divers at all times.
So we say the one mistake that could prevent all of this, even in this current, could be a boat following you.
Yes.
Wow. So before we go to the second part of your story, I want to get into the mindset of the person who thinks they're about to die. Did you have this thought that I'm going to die now? This is the end? Or there was still hope at every time, at every point of time?
I think it's a combination, actually. So at one point, the thought that went through my mind was, what if I die? What if I don't get found? What if I don't find land? Will I simply die floating on this ocean? How will I die? Will I die from sharks? Will I die from hypothermia? Will I die from sun exposure, dehydration? I had no idea. But it's strange also, there is a complete wave of strength, power, and willingness and desire to survive that takes over everything, that takes over the mental space, because there was nothing else that I could control. Everything was out of my control. So I'd said my goodbyes to my family just in case, but there was another part of me that was so willing to live and wanting to live. It didn't feel like that should be the end of my life. It didn't feel like I should die that way or at that age. At this age, I was 29. So I didn't feel like I hadn't lived enough to die.
Beautiful. So you were rescued. What happened next?
So this is where it became quite interesting, because we were rescued. We got taken back to shore, which was about 4 hours away. And one of the big things they wanted to do for us was to get us back in the water.
Interesting.
I know, it's a bit like that thing of getting back on a horse, getting back on a bike. They say that if you fall off a bike, you fall off a horse, the first thing you do is get back on that horse. I don't recall being fearful as such of getting back in the water. But I know that we got back in the next day, and it was just those of us that were on the boat that had been lost. And we went to very shallow waters, and we took small slates down and we played noughts and crosses underwater. Something that I've learned over the years is sometimes your mind has an incredible capacity to take over in any situation. It's such a powerful, powerful tool for us in both positive and negative ways. And sometimes it can be our absolute savior, and sometimes it can be our absolute opposite.
Yeah.
In whatever situation. Sometimes we can control it and sometimes we can't. And in that moment, they wanted us to stay occupied with our mind. So we did. And then the next thing we did, almost that same week, a few days later, we did our advanced course, which meant that we learned buoyancy, that we did a deep dive, and we learned navigation. The more skills that you learn, the more aware that you can be. It's sometimes, again, a double-edged sword, because you know what can go wrong.
Yes.
But you also know how you can survive. Yeah. And underwater, it's still considered an extreme sport in some ways. So I did my advanced course.
Quick question about
the
first dive. How did you feel after this trauma, which was a very traumatic event? You're going for the first time again underwater. What went through your mind?
I was nervous, but I wanted to do it. Like, I wanted to overcome that fear. I wanted to overcome that feeling of helplessness. And I wanted to know that I was in control of myself underwater. We went to a very easy dive site. Like we said, we were shallow. And I do remember feeling a sense of peace and ease underwater at that time. I went through many ups and downs of emotions throughout my diving career and my work career. But at that time, I felt ease. And I wanted to get more experience. I wanted to learn. And one of the biggest things for me was that I never wanted to go through that experience again. So I wanted to learn how I could have done things differently, or how I could avoid being in that situation myself another time.
I guess maybe let's touch on that as well. Knowing what you know now, if you would go on the same dive, what would you do? Personally.
Yeah.
You cannot control a person. I guess maybe you can, but in reality, there's somebody who made a mistake that wasn't you. But what could you have done to not to be in a situation ever again?
I would have not done the dive.
Should you say?
It is one of the biggest things. I have done many dives with many different dive organizations, many different companies. The ones where you feel safest is where you can engage with the dive master or the instructor, the leader of that boat, and they say, if at any point you don't want to dive, you don't dive. And in my career of diving, there have been times where I've been on the surface of that water and I've looked down and I've said, nope, I'm not diving. And I've been with many other people who have also done the same. to abort a dive, as we say, called abort a dive, to abort a dive, to not dive, is one of the most courageous and powerful things that you can do as a diver when you know that for whatever reason, you just don't feel comfortable enough to dive. And that should be for anyone that is listening, anyone that goes diving, be it your first dive or thousands of dives. Never, ever feel that you can't say, I don't want to dive. I don't feel comfortable diving right now. And you just get back on that boat. Because if I was a dive master or if I was a client on a dive boat now and I went to that dive site, for a start, I would look down and I wouldn't descend unless I was near the reef. If I was near the reef and saw the movement of the fish in the ways that we know they move when there's really strong currents, I would say, I'm not comfortable diving here. Sorry.
So those are all the things that you experienced on this day when you got lost.
Those are the things I didn't experience. So there was no orientation to the reef. I wasn't experienced enough to know. I had 10 dives or 12 dives. At that time, you are so blissfully unaware.
But did you feel uncomfortable that day to dive?
No, because I didn't know any different. So I just descended, and it wasn't until we were underwater and I thought, oh, I can't see a reef. All I can see is water. All I can see is ocean. And of course, in those situations, it's so easy to get disorientated. You don't know where you are. You don't know which direction you're heading unless you have a compass and you're navigating. You know how to navigate.
Yeah.
And you don't know how close you are or how far away you are from a reef. And you always need a reef, generally speaking. In most cases, you have a reef or an ocean floor or something that allows you to know how fast you're moving and whether your depth is changing. You know that in your ears as well, but you need to orientate yourself to something unless you're specifically doing blue diving, which means you don't have anything except probably sharks or big fish to look at.
I'm thinking I did 5 dives, so I'm a very inexperienced diver. And what you're saying, I never had awareness of any of this. So I could have gone underwater and then realized that, well, I'm in the same situation as you, just because it's hard to see if people are good at what they do or not. Like, apparently the guy who went away and left you guys alone wasn't good enough for the job, I guess, or experienced enough, or maybe something happened. So, but you could not test it until it happens. So for me, as an inexperienced diver, I guess if I don't know what you're telling me right now, there's no way for me to know that I'm in danger.
Yes. And that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges in the industry. So the biggest thing that needs to be, I would say, to be implemented in any dive organization is a set of procedures. What is the procedure if ABC, whatever it might be? And I've been running marine projects now for 20 years, and I have changed many procedures to ensure that safety is absolutely paramount. And sometimes it's been a challenge for other people to accept that really we're doing all of these changes and procedures, but for me, if we as the humans underwater are not safe or don't feel safe, they're different things, but they have to work together, then there's no dive.
And because of your procedures, you had so many dives and you never had any of those situations like you experienced.
No. I mean, one of the biggest things for me was I then went on to become a dive master. And with the organization in which I've been trained, a dive master allows you to lead certified divers. I can assist on a training. I can lead divers who are already certified. So they're under my control, but they're also under my responsibility. So I'm responsible where we dive, how deep we dive, what we see, how long we dive for. So what I did after that is I continued with that same organization. I stayed with them then for nearly 20 years.
Wow.
I was then responsible for dive procedures. I was responsible for everything that allowed us to dive safely. And so I was able to implement procedures that meant that this would never happen again. And I had thousands of people that dived with us. And the procedures allowed them to dive safely at all times. They were very conservative. Many people thought they were overly conservative. For me, there was never really an overly conservative. But most people had no idea what I had been through. No, it wasn't a story that I told. So I was running an organization of hundreds and hundreds of people and had thousands of dives, and nobody really knew what I had been through to know why I was so conservative. But what it did was it allowed me to feel confidence in everyone that was diving. It allowed students and our dive staff, dive professionals, and people learning to dive to know what it means to have procedures, to know what it means to have safety protocols, and for then probably of the 10,000 people that have come through working with me over the years, to have had that experience to then when they go on to either dive with an organization, to run a marine program, to be someone that sets procedures in place, to know that this experience was one that they'd had, and whether they choose to implement procedures to that level or not is up to them, but at least they can have had that experience themselves and hopefully then implement it elsewhere so that organizations around the world can have procedures which allow divers to be safe in the water.
What were some of the procedures that people were saying, no, that's too much. I don't know why we need that.
A lot of it was depth, how deep they went, dive time, how many certified divers were with a dive professional, whether people could dive without a professional seeing them, how long they have in between each dive. But a lot of it was those were thankfully in place already. The organization already had a lot of procedures in place. It was more about how we could then improve them. And often it wasn't even about procedures. Often it was about awareness.
Yes.
Awareness of these procedures and training of the people concerned. Training of the boat crews. Training of people, the Indonesian community that were diving with us, for them to understand why you have procedures. This country is incredible in so many ways. Health and safety protocols are not always top of the list in many organizations. So to implement them and to ensure that the community understood why, there's always a why.
Yeah.
And our role is to ask why and to be able to answer that question as to why. Why do we do this? And then it's a case of understanding, putting all that together, why we're doing this, how this can keep you safe, and what we can then learn from that to implement in future. It's so easy to as I say, be blissfully unaware of the power of the ocean or the power of anything, not Mother Nature.
Yeah. Because I assume the guy who was on a boat with you that day, there was a procedure for him to follow you guys.
I'd like to think so.
He just didn't do it.
I'd like
which
to
is the
think
biggest
so.
problem, where I think it's very hard in countries like here where there's not a lot of control, oversight, and whatever the consequences are, they're not as strict unless somebody dies. Following the protocol is a big problem, because most of the time people are like, yeah, I understand it, but I did many times the dives and I know better than anybody else. I'm just gonna go get my coffee and then I'm gonna come back. And it's like across everywhere in people's lives. So they don't take it to the amount of seriousness that they should, considering the danger of it.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of that is cultural. They have a beautiful way, the Balinese have a beautiful way of and Indonesian as a whole, in many Indonesian cultures, don't really look into the future.
Yeah.
They're very present, which is a wonderful skill to have. Many of us are either in the past or in the future. But there are other ways in which we can be needing to consider what might happen to allow us to have a greater sense of focus on the present, to ensure that we don't come across problems which are then far more difficult to resolve when you're in the middle of them.
The other thing that is very interesting to me, and we talked about it before, that you're still afraid of water. Even though you did so many dives, there's still something in you that you cannot swim in the ocean where there's deep. Tell me about it. Like how is this related to everything you did in the water for many, many years? 20 years, you're diving everywhere, teaching people, but you're still afraid of water.
It is probably one of the biggest challenges for me. And it's still something I would love to resolve. Because there's still a fear of that moment where I had no control, where I was being pulled away from the land at a speed that I wasn't able to counterbalance. So the trauma that is still in me, that I've tried very hard and is still working on resolving, is that when I go in the water, I will just be whisked away.
Wow.
So I can swim. I have no issues with swimming. And when I dive, I'm a strong diver. But the mental trauma that is still there is that I will be left fully alone in the ocean. So, yeah, it's rare that I will go into water unless I have either a boat or a means of getting back to shore if I need to. So I won't go in the water by myself. I won't go in the water at the moment without an SMB. It provides me with a sense of security. But it's really challenging because I have huge amounts of experience. And there's an automatic assumption. When someone says to you that they're experienced in whatever it might be. If I say I'm a dive master with over 2,000 dives, people would automatically assume that they can put me in any situation, in any ocean, and I will be able to just navigate it. And I probably could, unless this kicks in and there's a memory and an immediate return to the emotion that I was feeling at that time. Over these 2,000 dives, there have been many dives where I've been in currents. And almost every single time I get thrown back in my mind to that memory. And then I just have to overcome it.
How do you overcome it? What do you say to yourself to get back to?
I have to say, Pippa, you know that you can overcome this. You know what to do. I know how to do it. I learned how to navigate strong currents. I learned how to. So it's your positioning in the water. It's moving away from the current, or it's moving with the current, depending on which situation you're in. It's getting into a safe space within the reef where you're protected, where you can then slowly just move up to the surface. It's knowing that the boat is above you and following you. It's putting up your SMB, which is on a long reel, many, many meters of reel. It's putting up that SMB so that the boat knows that you are moving in a direction and you are probably slowly coming to the surface.
Wow.
And then you just have to get past that. Now, there are times where I know myself well enough that then there are some dives I would never do. I now dive very shallow. All of my work recently, in recent years, has been very shallow.
What's a shallow for?
Shallow is, we've been restoring reefs at 3 or 4 meters.
Okay.
I literally can see the reef above me. I have a boat right next to me.
Yeah.
There are, I wouldn't necessarily advise people to, to be able to get beyond this. You need support. You need to be able to move through this trauma with a professional. I have had many people dive with me who are helping me get through this. I go through regular diving with an instructor that knows my trauma, and that I am literally underwater with us going through procedure after procedure to help me move through and resolve this trauma.
Yeah.
And it's still there at times, and I still have people I work with, both online, verbally and underwater, that I just dive with them to help me slowly move through this. And it just takes experience, time and time and time again. But now I don't work as a dive master. I don't take students because I don't want to put anyone else in danger.
Okay.
So I work with people that know my history. Everyone that I dive with knows my experience now. I chose to do that instead. We all agree on where we're diving. And I have a boat. The procedure I put in place is that I have a boat literally there. So if I need to come up, I come up straight away.
So if we take a very unfortunate situation where, let's say, things got wrong in the same way. So let's say you who did all those dives back to where you were, where things went wrong. Let's say in some magic, I think it's very hard to do because I have all the procedures. But let's say things got wrong and you're getting carried away again. Would there be something else you would do in this situation, or you approach the situation now having 2,500 dives so as wet as you have?
If I was underwater and I got whisked away in a current, it depends on the current itself. You would have to navigate that current based on my experience and my training. I would navigate that current the best way that I could. I would ensure that my dive buddies, the person I'm diving with, was either with me or that I was able to communicate with them through sound underwater. We have methods of making sound underwater. That they would then follow me or could see where I was going. That would then alert them to go straight to the surface and get the boat to come and get me. If I was in that situation again, I would get all of us to hold on to each other. I would never have allowed us to be away from each other underwater. But it's actually one of my biggest fears because the trauma is so powerful. I fear that I would not be able to stay as calm as I did the first time. And I think that is actually one of the biggest fears as to why I don't go in the water so much, because I don't know how I would respond and cope a second time, given the amount of willpower and strength that I had to have to keep myself alive the first time.
Well, for people who are watching us, listening to us, and they had similar trauma to yours, what advice can you give them to overcome it?
Yeah, to overcome water trauma, I think there needs to be really specialist guidance. There are people who have helped me, and there are people who are still helping me. And I would recommend people to always try and find help. There is someone out there that will always be able to help anyone in any form of trauma. There is someone out there to help you. It's finding the right person. And I think everyone can probably relate to that has found someone to help them, needed help, and then found someone to help them. Sometimes we find people that are specialists in an area of trauma-related psychology or counselling, whatever it might be, and they just don't relate to us, or we can't relate to them. And that's fine.
Yep.
It's then finding the next person and then finding the right person. And we all know in ourselves when we find the right person. That can be in any aspect of our life, in love, in relationship, in work colleagues, to work alongside someone that really gets you and knows you and understands you, takes you for all that you are. That is really powerful.
For sure.
And it's so important in every aspect of life to be able to do that. So there will always be someone that can help you. There's always a solution to any problem. And in my line of work now, sort of in that consultancy line of work, I'm helping people implement procedures. I'm helping people know where there might be gaps, which can help them ensure that safety is paramount, safety is considered and is in place. So that hopefully the amount of these kind of situations, which are unfortunately quite regular around the world in places where diving organizations have less procedures or fewer procedures or less safety, this happens less frequently, and we can reduce the amount of people that are lost at sea.
Do you know what happened to the other people who were lost in the sea with you? How did they cope with that? I assume they had lots of trauma as well.
Yeah, I think from what I'm aware, one of the people never dived again, which I can completely understand. There are times where I thought, what am I doing? Am I putting myself through trauma all the time by going in the ocean? But restoring reefs, creating opportunities for people to explore the ocean, to provide opportunities to bring safety procedures, protocols, experience to people that were taking other people diving. They all overcame, they were bigger than the fear of repeating that again.
Yeah. I remember you told me that at some point you even rehired the guy who left you in a sea.
Yes.
How did that happen?
So when I was a student in that particular location, he was automatically fired. I then went on to work for this organization for many, many years. And he was actually a brilliant member of the boat team and the boat crew. His awareness of the water was extraordinary. And I wanted to see if we could come to an agreement, an arrangement to see if it could work for him to work with us again. Because I wanted his knowledge. I wanted his understanding of the ocean. There are some incredible cultural communities here in Indonesia where their knowledge of the ocean is just incredible, amazing. It's like having a GPS in their heads.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. And for me, I wanted to take advantage of that. And everyone deserves a second chance if the situation allows it to be done safely. So we spoke, we met, we talked about what happened. We talked about what he did. And then I said, okay, I want you back on the team. These are the procedures. This is how we take our divers diving now. This is what happens. This is what happens in an emergency. And you follow these every time. And he became one of our best and most reliable members of the boat crew. I would have had him on any of my boats. All of the team knew about what had happened to me. And so there were sometimes I was diving and I could hardly see anything because the boat was literally right above me. They knew my fins, they knew me underwater, they knew my wetsuit, they knew how I dived. They did not take their eyes off me underwater, and he was especially careful with me. I felt so safe underwater when I was diving, and that helped me, because when I felt safe, the chances of that trauma coming back in those moments was very, very rare. Very rare.
Did you meet with them at that day when you decided to reconnect? Did he accept it, that he was wrong?
Yes. We didn't focus on it, the situation. We just talked about what could have been done differently. For me, as a leader, as a manager, as a boss, whatever line I've been in, I've always been in leadership roles. It's about how to empower people.
Yeah.
I like to see what is everyone's potential, and how can I take them there, and how can they go on and be the best they can be in whatever role they might be. That can be any culture, any nationality, any age. Is what is their potential? Do they know what their potential is? Some of them don't. Some of them do. Some of them don't know how to get there. And I try and help them be that and do that.
I mean, if I were you, just imagining in my head, I would feel so angry towards a person who did that to me, because his mistake led me to have this trauma for the rest of my life. So it would take me a lot of courage to overcome that anger and blame, saying, if it wasn't you, I would be in a completely different situation, to then go and say, okay, let's leave it all behind and let's work together to make it better for everybody else.
Yeah, the thing is, I think, in any situation, there's a multitude of things. We call it the perfect storm.
Mm-hmm.
On probably 99 times out of 100 other dives, nothing would have happened. He could have gone off. We could have had the most amazing dive. There'd have been no current. We'd have seen incredible fish. We would have come up after a full dive. He would have still not been there, but it would have been flat calm, no currents. We'd have put up our SMBs and he would have come and picked us up. And we would never have known any different.
Yes, I see what you're saying.
And that could easily have been the situation that day. And in another situation, he could have been above us. And we could have got ripped down by down currents and had to climb up the reef, which I've heard horror stories of as well.
Wow, that happened too?
Oh yeah, people have had to put their fins in their BCDs and climbed up a reef because the current is so strong.
And if you don't have a reef next to you, you just die.
Well, you get whisked out and you just have to try and kick out. Down currents will normally do this. They will spiral, but they're generally not very wide. But over a reef, the water will come over. So if the reef wall is here, the water will generally come over like this. So if you can get in here, you're okay until you have to crawl up over the crest. So I could have been in that situation, and he might have been right above us and not been able to do anything to save us either. There are so many different scenarios that could have happened. That was the scenario at that time. But I never really had any bad feeling towards him. Like, it was just a case of, this was the journey that life took me on. I've had an incredible 20 years in the marine industry. I've seen incredible things. I've worked on incredible projects. I've had the opportunity to teach and train and be inspired by and be an inspiration to many, many people around the world. And for that, I'm incredibly, incredibly grateful.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that, because now we scared everybody from trying diving. They're like, no. I'm not going to go there.
Not at all.
So what are some of the most incredible memories of you being underwater?
I mean, the ocean, the marine world, coral reefs are such a beautiful and diverse environment that everybody should have the opportunity to see. Many people have never seen coral reefs. And coral reefs are in the the tropical environment. You have incredible marine environments in the temperate and in the polar regions as well.
I dived in Vancouver.
The ocean is just, 70% of the world's surface is the ocean.
Yeah.
We should understand it more. We should know what it has the power to be. We only do that through experience. My experience has allowed many other people to dive more safely and to experience the ocean in a way they may not have done before. So I actually see it as being a benefit to myself, to my career, to those that I have had the pleasure to enjoy the ocean with. So I've had some just truly wonderful experiences. I went to Fiji and saw hammerheads in the middle, and this was bizarrely in the middle of the ocean. But there were times where, again, once I knew that I had this experience, I knew that I knew my own limitations. In anything in life, we need to go within our own limitations, whatever that might be. For some people, it could be diving, free diving to however many meters. Some people, it might be literally diving in a small lagoon at 2 meters because they don't want to be in the open ocean. And to them, that's still experiencing something amazing. We dive within our own limitations. I have seen hammerheads. I've seen incredible schools of fish. I've been sat in the middle of schooling barracuda around me,
Wow.
schooling snapper, and just looking up and thinking, this is one of the most amazing things I have ever seen in my life. And I still have those memories. I have everything in life will give you a memory. Making memories is one of the beauties of life. And that can be in every aspect. But those memories, there'll be some good and there'll be some bad. There'll be some just like life-changing. Life-changing can be good and bad.
Yes, 100%.
And it's important that we all know that those traumatic ones can also change us for the better.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things that I've taken away from this experience is, yes, it was traumatic. Yes, I would never want anyone to experience that. But it allowed me to experience the ocean in a way where I had such respect for it. And when I dive safely. Everything can be done safely, most generally speaking.
I did few crazy things in my life, and still diving to me scares me, just because there's so much equipment that you need to sort of be aware of. And for me, my mind doesn't work that way. I have this, I cannot focus on many things at the same time. So I'm just getting purely overwhelmed by amount of things. I start clicking things and they're not working. And then it's like buoyancy.
Yeah.
For me, I really like predictable flow.
Yeah.
And I'm okay in a chaos where I can understand it.
Yeah.
But you're in a completely new environment with all the overhead of everything that is around you, which to me, if some entrepreneurs who are in diving industry listening, you should figure out the ways how it all needs to be easier, because there's so many bells and whistles that it's pretty hard.
Yeah, but there are people that will always help you with that. So for me, anyone in your situation, as you just said then, you go with a really good dive school.
Yeah.
You say to that person that is taking you diving, who is a dive instructor or a dive master that has a lot of experience with new divers.
Yeah.
You say exactly that to them, and they'll say, it's okay, I've got you. I've been in a situation as a dive master. I had someone panic with me underwater, and I had to rescue her. And I was as calm can be.
Yeah.
And this was after that experience. I had a lot of my diving experience where I wasn't in fear. As I've got older, that fear has become stronger again. But there were many years where I didn't necessarily have that same fear. But I always adapted to my own environment. And if I wasn't comfortable diving, I didn't dive.
Yeah.
If I needed help and support in getting through that wave of trauma or memory or fear, then I would get help and support.
Yeah.
And then I would retrain myself in a way. I would go back in the water with people that could help me.
I had 2 times where everybody's diving and then they look at me and I'm like, have like oxygen from the dive master because I used all my oxygen in the first like 10 minutes. I was so excited.
So in those situations, one of the biggest responsibilities that as a dive professional I would have, but also that any diver underwater, diver that is taking someone underwater, is you have what's called an SPG.
Yeah.
And it tells you how much air you have. And we are responsible as dive professionals to either check that for our students or our students to check it themselves. Sometimes people breathe very quickly because they are super excited. They're like, oh my goodness, look at all these fish. And I've been diving with students that have done that. And so I've had people with me that say, okay, I've used nearly all my air. And we had a rule where once you get to 70, you have to let us know when you get to 100 bar.
Yeah.
And then when you get to 70 bar. And then when you get to 50 bar. Because at 50 bar, you need to be on the surface.
Yeah.
And sometimes people would get from 200 bar to 50 bar in less than 20 minutes. We were like, wow. And there'd be other people diving exactly the same dive. They would still have 150 bar in their tanks.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Everybody is different. Everybody experiences things differently. Underwater, people can be so calm. When I'm underwater, generally speaking, I am so calm because I love the feeling of being mutually buoyant underwater. It is a feeling you can't explain to anyone who doesn't dive. And it's a feeling that every diver will say, oh yeah. To be neutrally buoyant, to be at peace underwater, to only feel your own breath, and to be in the ocean. It is an experience that you can't sometimes put words to.
If you would go 20 years back and you would meet yourself, you can say before, after the trauma, you can choose it, and you would give yourself some advice. What advice would that be?
I guess I've got 2 answers to that. There would be the answer of pre-trauma and being aware enough or having had more experience before going underwater to be able to make a choice as to whether I wanted to do that dive. Part of me feels that every experience shapes us. So, good and bad. Would I go back and change that experience?
Yeah, that's my next question, yes.
I don't know if I would. But I think what I would possibly want to change, if I could, is my immediate self-care approach afterwards. To immediately go into a space where I got a lot of help and support, even when I didn't think I needed it. Or know that I needed it. I was very confident at first. Directly afterwards, bizarrely, it seems to be opposite to what some people might think might be the case. I was very confident straight afterwards, with less experience in the water. As I got more experience in the water, I became less confident.
I guess the last question I ask everybody, according to people, how to live a happy and fulfilling life.
Oh,
It can be related to diving or anything else.
I'm very grateful to be able to say that I feel I live a happy and fulfilled life. There are many things to get me to that space. A lot of that is following instincts, following desire, following life goals, I suppose, and also being okay with having a life that to some may seem quite different to what a normal life should be. I kind of always knew that I wouldn't lead a life which was going to follow what society at times depicts as a normal life. And now, of course, everything is different. But, when you're young, there's a kind of a normality that you think you might follow. And I didn't really do that. But I had amazing experiences. I traveled to many countries. I had things that happened in my life that have changed how I look at life. They've changed how I make decisions. They've changed choices that I would make. But all I ever really wanted to try and do was to live a life that was fulfilling, that allowed me to experience many things, but really one that allowed me to feel at peace with myself and to know that at any point when life comes to an end, that I really feel that I have lived a life that I'm proud of and that I have had a pleasure to be part of.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you for coming and sharing this story. I know you haven't shared it publicly before, so I'm very honored that we can bring it to all the people and they can learn and hopefully be safe, at least more safe. I don't know if you can be 100% safe, but learning from this can be more safe while they're diving and also get inspired to go underwater and try more.
Absolutely. No, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm very grateful to have been here. Thank you.
Thank you guys for listening. Please, whatever you watch, like and subscribe before you go and jump into the water and be safe. Bye-bye.